He helped her zip the dress before the gala, but had no idea that single gesture would unravel both their worlds. The clock above the sewing table ticked toward midnight, its rhythm soft against the hum of the iron. Ethan Miles pressed another seam beneath a wash of steam, shoulders stooped, fingers moving with the quiet certainty of habit. The workshop smelled of starch and thread wax, the air warm despite winter clawing at the windows. Tomorrow was the annual Langford Charity Gala, an ocean of wealth and champagne that existed a world away from this dim back room. For Ethan, it meant, over time, one more night, keeping other people's dreams stitched together while his own waited in silence. He paused to stretch his back. On the rack hung a gown that caught the low light, a deep crimson creation, shimmering like still fire. A note pinned to its tag read, "Urgent alteration. Client, Isabella Langford." He had heard the name 100 times, whispered with awe. The woman who built empires out of silk and vision, whose face filled magazines Ethan's daughter liked to flip through for color inspiration. He never imagined she'd be standing in front of him. The door burst open with the rush of perfume and cold air. He looked up, startled. She stood framed in the doorway, tall, poised, but not untouched by panic. One strap of the dress slipped from her shoulder, the zipper halfway down her back.
"They sent me here," she said, breathless.
It tore 5 minutes before the gala. Her voice carried command, yet trembled underneath. Ethan wiped his hands on a cloth and approached carefully. "You can step behind the screen, Ms. Langford. I'll fix it." "No time," she murmured, turning her back. "Just please." For a moment he hesitated, aware of the gulf between their worlds. His palms were rough from years of labor. Hers, pale perfection reflected in the mirror's glow. He caught the zipper between 2 fingers, guiding it upward through silk that whispered under his touch. The faint tremor of fabric met the steady beat of his heart. She exhaled, a single sigh that seemed to unspool tension from the room. "Thank you," she said, barely above a whisper. He nodded, not trusting words. Under fluorescent light, her eyes found his in the mirror, grey meeting gold, 2 people who had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Outside, distant car horns called her back to a life measured in headlines and investors. Inside, the air held the delicate hush that follows revelation. She straightened, composure returning, but her gaze lingered a heartbeat longer than courtesy required. "What's your name?"
"Ethan, Ethan," she repeated, as if testing how humility sounded when spoken by power.
"I'll make sure your supervisor hears about this." He smiled faintly. "That's kind, ma'am, but just glad it zipped." Her lips curved, almost warmth, almost regret. Then she was gone, heels tapping into the corridor, perfume fading like memory. Ethan stood alone amid the hum of machines and cooling irons, the crimson gown's reflection still trembling in the mirror.
One touch, one glance, and the world she'd spent years controlling suddenly slipped.
The sound of her heels faded down the hall, leaving behind the faint trace of perfume and something heavier, silence, that hummed in Ethan's chest long after she was gone. He turned back to his bench, the glow from the single bulb throwing a soft halo over spools of thread and scraps of satin. The gala gowns waited, gleaming like strangers too beautiful to touch. He picked up his needle again, but the rhythm felt different, slower, as if his hands were remembering warmth instead of fabric. Outside, the city roared, horns, laughter, the low thunder of limousines pulling up to marble steps. Through the window, he could see flashes of light from photographers waiting for the night's star to arrive. Somewhere in that storm of glitter and glass was the woman who had stood right here moments ago, asking for help with a zipper she could have summoned 10 assistants to fix. Ethan shook his head, smiling to himself. Life was strange like that. The rich always found ways to appear untouchable, yet tonight one had trembled in his hands. He was packing away his tools when the door creaked open again. A man in a black suit stood framed against the light of a car idling outside. "Mr. Miles?" he asked, his voice professional but cautious. "Miss Langford would like a word before she leaves." Ethan frowned, surprised. He wiped his palms on his apron and followed the driver out into the chilled air. The parking bay smelled faintly of rain and exhaust. Beside a sleek black sedan, Isabella stood with her phone in hand, the night air tugging softly at her hair. The gala dress glittered beneath the dull street lamp like captured fire. When she looked up, her expression softened from business to something quieter. "I didn't thank you properly," she said. "You did," he replied. "But you're welcome again." She studied him, tilting her head as if searching for the kind of man who said things simply. "You work here every night?" "Most nights," he answered. "Someone has to make sure the city shines by morning," her lips curved. "And who makes sure you do?" Ethan chuckled, the sound small but genuine. "A cup of tea, maybe my daughter's smile. That's enough shine for me." The driver shifted, signaling the paparazzi were growing restless outside the gate. Cameras waited like hungry stars. Yet Isabella lingered, a CEO with an empire to host, and a life scheduled down to the second, refusing to leave a dim workshop that smelled of soap and fabric glue. "Well," she said finally. "Thank you again, Ethan." He nodded, stepping back toward the doorway. "Good luck at your gala, Miss Langford." She hesitated, the way one does when there's more to say, but no reason to say it. "You'll call me Isabella next time." Then the door shut, and her car rolled away into flashes of white light. Ethan stood in the doorway, the city's glitter reflecting faintly on his tired face. She had everything money could buy, yet wanted to know the man who owned nothing but peace. The Langford Charity Gala glittered like a dream carved out of crystal. Chandeliers spilled gold across marble floors, champagne chimed in tall glasses, and the city's most powerful people floated through the ballroom wrapped in laughter that never quite touched their eyes. At the center of it all stood Isabella Langford, radiant in her crimson gown, every inch the queen of her own empire. Cameras followed her, her name whispered like prayer. Yet behind the poised smile, she felt the faintest tremor, an echo of a voice that didn't belong in this room, Ethan's voice. It came uninvited, quiet as breath. "That's kind, Ma'am, but just glad it zipped." Simple words, humble tone, yet they carried warmth no chandelier could mimic. She raised her glass, but even the sparkle of champagne reminded her of the soft reflection in his eyes under flickering fluorescent light. Applause swelled as she stepped onto the stage, lights flooding her face. The speech she'd delivered every year waited on the teleprompter, perfectly rehearsed. But as she looked at the sea of faces, donors, investors, journalists, it all blurred. She spoke the first few lines, her voice clear but hollow. The words about innovation, growth, and giving back floated out like confetti, weightless, empty. She blinked, and for a heartbeat, the ballroom shimmered into something else. The memory of a small workshop, the sound of fabric breathing under steady hands. Her throat tightened. "And so," she began again, voice softer now, "we gather to celebrate generosity, the kind that builds, mends, and quietly holds us together." No one noticed she had strayed from the script. Her assistant frowned. The crowd listened. Somewhere deep down, Isabella realized her empire had become noise, loud, beautiful, but lonely. Beneath applause and flashing cameras, she kept hearing a whisper. Breathe. Miles away, in a cramped apartment above a closed hardware store, Ethan adjusted the antenna on an old television until the Gala broadcast flickered into focus. "There she is," Lily said, sprawled on the couch, wrapped in a quilt. "Dad, that's the lady you helped, right?" Ethan chuckled. "Looks like it." "She's stunning," Lily said, munching popcorn. "Maybe she'll call you for another zipper emergency." He smiled, shaking his head. "I think people like her live in a different world, kiddo." The heater coughed out a faint rattle before falling silent again. He rubbed his palms together, pretending not to notice. On screen, Isabella's laughter filled the room. Soft, measured, practiced. Ethan leaned back, gaze drifting to a pile of unopened bills near the sewing machine. "Still," Lily continued, "you helped her. That's something." He nodded, eyes fixed on the glowing figure in the crimson dress. "Yeah, that's something. 2 worlds, one drowning in light, one surviving in shadows, shared the same night's quiet. The city outside glittered and sighed, unaware that 2 lonely hearts had already begun turning toward each other, guided by the faint memory of silk, warmth, and the whisper of a zipper closing. Morning light poured through the glass walls of Isabella's penthouse, soft but relentless. The city moved below like 1,000 glittering ants, efficient, mechanical, distant. She sipped coffee gone cold, eyes fixed on nothing, her mind still tracing the line of a zipper and the warmth of calloused fingers steadying silk. She'd faced boardrooms full of men twice her age, held her company through recessions and scandals, yet couldn't quiet the image of a quiet man saying, "Just glad it zipped." The woman who never repeated an outfit suddenly couldn't stop replaying one moment. Her phone sat beside a stack of unread emails. She opened her contacts, found the boutique number, and hesitated. It was absurd, she told herself. CEOs didn't call tailors. Still, before her mind could catch up with her impulse, she pressed the button. "Langford Couture Alterations," a woman's voice answered. "This is Isabella Langford," she said, tone slipping automatically into command.
"I'd like to thank the tailor who helped me last night."
Ethan, was it? A pause. Then a startled male voice, low and roughened by sleepless nights.
Yes, ma'am."
Ethan Miles speaking. "Good morning, Mr. Miles. You did me quite a favour yesterday." He laughed softly. "Just doing my job, Miss Langford." She smiled, hearing humility layered with exhaustion. "Still, I could use another favour. We have a design review tomorrow. New line, different approach."
"I need a fresh eye."
"Someone who sees the fabric, not the label." "I don't think I'm qualified for that," he said quickly. "I just fix what tears." "That's precisely why I want you there," she replied. "Sometimes we need people who still notice the seams." He fell silent, and for a second she imagined him rubbing his neck, brow furrowed, searching for polite refusal.
"It's paid," she added, sensing his pride.
And entirely optional when she ended the call. A small flutter pressed against her ribs, something that felt suspiciously like excitement. Across the city, Ethan hung up, staring at his phone as if it might bite. He had work stacked for days and clothes to deliver by noon, yet the echo of her voice lingered like perfume.
"A design review," he muttered, half amused, half afraid.
What's she doing asking a guy like me? From the kitchenette, Lily appeared in her school uniform, toast in hand. "Who was that?" He hesitated. "Someone from work." Lily arched an eyebrow. "Someone with a nice voice." Ethan chuckled.
"Maybe she wants me to come look at designs." "So go," she said simply. He shook his head.
"That's not my world, kiddo," Lily shrugged, slinging her backpack over one shoulder. "Maybe it's your turn, Dad." After she left, the apartment felt strangely bright despite the cracked blinds. Ethan sat beside the humming sewing machine, thumb tracing the worn edge of a tape measure. A small smile tugged at his mouth as he whispered to himself, "Maybe it is." The glass tower of Langford Couture rose into the sky like a blade of light, gleaming above the noise of morning traffic. Ethan paused at the entrance, smoothing the sleeve of his thrift store blazer. It was the best he owned, pressed last night, with the same care he gave every gown, but it still smelled faintly of starch and time. He caught his reflection in the mirrored doors, clean shave, nervous eyes, the kind of man who fixed hems, not fortunes. With a steady breath he stepped inside. The lobby gleamed in marble and chrome. Staff in tailored black glanced up, smiles freezing when they saw him. He could almost hear the thoughts behind polite eyes. Who let the repairman in? Ethan straightened his shoulders, reminding himself that an invitation was still an invitation. The receptionist checked his name, hesitation flickering before she buzzed him through. Upstairs, the elevator hummed like a heartbeat. When the doors opened, Isabella was waiting. She wore a pale grey suit, hair swept back, her usual armor of confidence softened by something warmer. "You made it," she said. "Thank you for coming." "Couldn't turn down an opportunity to see where the magic happens," he replied, a small smile easing his nerves. As they entered the design room, a dozen pairs of eyes followed them. Sketches lined the walls, mannequins draped in fabric worth more than his yearly rent. Murmurs rippled through the group. Isabella ignored them, motioning Ethan to stand beside her. "Everyone, this is Mr. Miles. He'll be offering a craftsman's perspective today." A young designer whispered too loudly, "A tailor?" Isabella's gaze cut sharp as scissors. "A tailor," she said evenly, "who's about to teach us something." The room stilled. Ethan's palms itched, but he nodded, focusing on the nearest mannequin. "Beautiful stitching," he began gently, "but the waistline's uneven by a few millimeters. Under lights, it'll pull on the left seam." He moved to another piece. "This sleeve, too narrow at the shoulder, looks elegant on paper, but the model won't be able to lift her arm naturally." The designers blinked. Someone grabbed a measuring tape, checking. He was right. One by one, he pointed out details, tiny imperfections disguised by glamour. Every correction was polite, precise, impossible to argue. The whispers turned to note-taking. Isabella watched him, amusement glinting beneath pride. "You've just saved us 3 headlines and a week's worth of damage control," she said. For the first time in months, her laughter wasn't rehearsed. It rang light, surprising even herself. Ethan chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guess old habits die hard. Fabric tells on itself if you listen." "In a room full of experts," she said softly. Only the tailor saw what perfection had missed. Their eyes met over sketches and silk, the hum of tension changing pitch, no longer discomfort, but recognition. Around them, the city spun on its axis, oblivious to 2 worlds quietly stitching themselves together, thread by invisible thread. The meeting stretched until the afternoon sun began to fade behind the skyline. When it finally ended, the others drifted out with murmured goodbyes and rustling papers. Isabella lingered by the window, gaze resting on the city far below.
You were right about every stitch," she said quietly.
"You see what most people overlook," Ethan smiled, slipping his hands into his pockets.
Guess I've spent half my life looking at what doesn't fit." She turned, amused.
"That sounds like a philosophy," he shrugged. "Maybe just habit," the elevator chimed. They stepped in together, silence stretching easy this time, not awkward. On the ground floor, the glass doors slid open, and the sound of rain filled the lobby like applause. Sheets of water blurred the street, wind whipping through the awning outside. "Well," she sighed, "seems the universe wants me to stay longer." "Or to slow down," he said. "It's good at that." She glanced at him, surprised by the simple wisdom.
"Coffee, then? There's a cafe across the street. Sure, though you'll need a boat." They laughed, stepping under the awning as thunder rumbled above.
The rain came harder, pounding the pavement until it glistened like glass. A gust of wind sprayed mist across them both. Isabella yelped, clutching her clutch tighter, while Ethan's old jacket absorbed the blow like it was built for storms. "Remind me never to trust weather forecasts again," she said. Her laugh breaking through the chill. Ethan grinned. "Forecasts lie. Fabric tells the truth. She looked at him then, really looked. This man with steady hands, rain dripping from his hair, standing calm against the world's noise. For reasons she couldn't name, her chest loosened. She slipped off her heels and stepped barefoot onto the concrete, the cool rain splashing her ankles.
You think I'm crazy now, don't you?
He shook his head.
I think you finally look free, she laughed again, a sound that startled even her.
It wasn't elegant or measured, it was alive. The kind of laugh she hadn't heard from herself in years. Ethan watched, half smiling, half caught off guard by the beauty of simplicity. No red carpets, no cameras, just rain and the sound of something unguarded breaking open between them. Another gust swept through, catching her shoulders in a shiver. Without thinking, he took off his jacket and placed it gently around her. The fabric was rough, smelling faintly of soap and thread, but warm, human warmth, not borrowed from privilege. She drew it close, eyes glistening under the streetlight.
You'll freeze, she said softly. He smiled. I've been through worse. For a moment neither spoke.
The city blurred into silver streaks around them, thunder fading into rhythm. The storm outside eased, but neither noticed. Inside that narrow shelter of rain and light, it was quiet, almost peaceful. For once, the storm outside felt gentler than the one they both carried inside. The apartment smelled of coffee and rain when Ethan returned that night. Lily sat cross-legged on the couch, her sketchbook open across her knees, eyes bright with mischief. "So," she began, "how was your fancy meeting with the fashions, Queen?" Ethan dropped his keys into a bowl, pretending not to notice the grin on her face. "Productive," he said, loosening his collar. "That's not an answer." She leaned forward, pencil twirling between her fingers. "Are you falling for her?" He froze halfway to the kitchen, laughing it off too quickly. "Don't be ridiculous." "Dad," she said softly, smile fading. "You're smiling like a teenager. That's suspicious." He turned away, hiding behind the ritual of boiling water for tea. "She's just different. Kind in a strange way, but she belongs to another world, Lil." "Maybe that's not a bad thing," she said, flipping a page. "Maybe the world needs to mix a little." Ethan didn't answer. On the wall above the sink hung a framed photograph, a woman with warm eyes and a summer smile, Lily's mother. He reached out, tracing the edge of the frame with his thumb. "Your mum used to say the same thing," he murmured. "She believed hearts don't check bank accounts." The kettle whistled, sharp and sudden. Lily stood, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "She'd want you to be happy, Dad." He smiled, but the ache in his chest said otherwise. Happiness had a cost once, and he wasn't sure he could afford it again. Across the city, the morning's calm had already broken for Isabella Langford. Her assistant entered the office pale-faced, holding a tablet. "You should see this, ma'am." Headlines flashed across the screen. "CEO's secret night with mystery tailor?" From boardroom to backroom, Isabella's unlikely companion. Her stomach dropped. "How?" "Someone snapped a photo outside the cafe," the assistant said quietly. "You under the awning, his jacket." Isabella exhaled slowly, schooling her expression into composure. Of course they did. Minutes later, the boardroom filled with restless murmurs. Her chief investor cleared his throat. "We admire your philanthropy, Ms. Langford, but perhaps this relationship could distract from the brand's image." She met their gaze evenly. "If kindness is a liability, then perhaps our image needs revision." The silence that followed was colder than rain. By afternoon, gossip sites bloomed with speculation. A rival designer tweeted, "Nothing says charity like falling for your tailor." The post racked up thousands of likes before she even saw it. She turned off her phone. Her office, once a sanctuary of control, now felt heavy with invisible eyes. She sat at her desk, staring at the half-finished sketches. On the chair beside her lay Ethan's jacket, the one he'd draped over her shoulders the night it rained, threads frayed along the cuff, a stitch imperfect. She picked it up, running her fingers over the seams. The noise of the world dulled. For a moment, the empire of glass and steel around her quieted, and she remembered the sound of his voice in the storm. Every empire has a crack. Hers began with a heartbeat. The next morning, Ethan woke early, long before dawn painted color on the sky. The rain had stopped, leaving behind the smell of wet concrete and the faint chill that crept through the apartment's thin walls. He sat at his sewing table, the hum of the machine silent, his thoughts louder than the city outside. On a scrap of paper he wrote a single line in neat, deliberate handwriting. "Thank you for believing I could belong."
Even for a day. He stared at it for a long time before folding it carefully, sliding it into an envelope.
No return address, no name, just her office printed in the corner. He walked it to the post drop on his way to the workshop, each step heavier than the last. Distance was safer, he told himself. Safety had cost him enough already, but it still felt familiar. By noon, Isabella's assistant entered her office carrying a small envelope. This came by courier.
No sender listed. Isabella frowned, setting aside the stack of reports she'd been pretending to read.
She opened the letter, eyes catching the first line, and suddenly the noise of her world fell away. "Thank you for believing I could belong." Even for a day, she read it twice, then a third time, the ink blurring as her breath caught. The note was brief, painfully polite, yet carried the quiet finality of a closed door. Her fingers trembled. She reached for her phone, dialed his number once, then stopped halfway. What could she say? "Don't go?" It wasn't fair to ask. She had power, influence, everything but the right to make him stay. The meeting scheduled for that evening waited on her calendar. A dinner with investors, critical for the next quarter. She cancelled it without explanation. Within minutes, her driver was steering through evening traffic, city lights smearing across the windshield. "Where to, Mum?" he asked. She hesitated, then said, "Fulton Street, the tailor's district." The driver glanced back in surprise, but obeyed. When they arrived, the neighborhood was already dimming into night. Old brick buildings lined the street, their windows glowing with the last traces of work. Only one shop still had a light burning, a flicker of amber warmth spilling through drawn curtains. She stepped out into the chill air, her heels clicking softly on the wet pavement. Through the glass, she saw Ethan bent over a table, not alone this time. Lily sat beside him, face bright with focus, threading a needle as he guided her hands. They spoke in quiet laughter, their world small but complete. Isabella pressed a hand to the cool glass, watching them. Something inside her chest shifted, envy, admiration, maybe both. This, she realized, was what she'd been chasing through boardrooms and headlines. Connection.
Unguarded and real. He looked up just then, sensing movement.
And their eyes met through the reflection of the streetlight. No words, just a startled pause that carried more truth than any speech. She'd conquered cities, but one flickering light above his shop made her heart stop. The restaurant glittered with glass and candlelight, every table occupied by someone who had bought their way into the illusion of perfection. Isabella sat among them, posture flawless, smile rehearsed. Tonight was meant to secure a merger worth millions, a chance to silence gossip with success. Yet, as laughter rippled around her, she could feel every whisper grazing her skin, words like tailor, charity, scandal tossed between wine glasses like confetti. The chairman of Langford's newest investor group raised his glass, his grin too polished. "To Isabella," he said loudly, "a woman of impeccable taste."
Rumor even has it she's fallen for her tailor.
"Truly, a woman of the people." Laughter followed, sharp, knowing, cruel, the kind that carried more bite than humor. A few guests tried to soften it with awkward smiles, but the damage was done. Isabella set down her fork, pulse steady but cold. "Tell me," she said evenly, eyes locking on the man who'd spoken, "what's so funny about kindness?" The laughter died. He blinked, caught off guard.
Nothing.
"Just a joke." "Good," she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. "Because the man you're mocking isn't a headline.
His name is Ethan Miles. He's a widower, a father.
A craftsman who's built beauty from nothing but patience and grace. And when my world was falling apart, he was the only one who treated me like a person, not a brand." A hush fell over the table. Cameras from nearby diners, unnoticed until now, flashed in quick bursts.
Isabella didn't care. He gave me his jacket in the rain, she continued softly.
Not because he wanted anything, but because it was the decent thing to do. "That kind of decency seems rare in rooms like this." Someone cleared their throat. The investor who'd mocked her looked down, cheeks flushed. Isabella leaned back, exhaling slowly. "So if anyone here still finds it amusing," she added, "I suggest they invest elsewhere." Silence followed, heavy but clean, like a cut through silk. She rose, leaving her napkin neatly folded on the plate. "Enjoy your dinner," she said, and walked out into the cool night. Hours later, the clip appeared online, blurred cell phone footage capturing her speech, her trembling voice, the glint of tears she hadn't tried to hide. Within hours, it spread across social media. Kindness's power trended before dawn. Commentators called it raw, authentic, a masterclass in grace. Across town, Ethan watched it unfold on the small TV that barely held a signal.
Lily sat beside him, eyes wide. "Dad!"
"She's talking about you." He said nothing, but the flicker of emotion in his eyes said everything. On screen, Isabella's image froze mid-sentence, face strong, voice breaking just slightly. She wasn't the unreachable CEO anymore. She was human. Ethan leaned back, stunned, humbled, proud in a way he hadn't felt in years. For once, power didn't protect her, truth did, and somehow that truth had reached them both. By morning, the alley outside Ethan's workshop looked nothing like the quiet lane it had always been. Reporters huddled in clusters, umbrellas tilting against the drizzle, cameras flashing every time his door creaked open. Someone had leaked his address. A headline scrolled across a tablet nearby. "Meet Ethan Miles, the tailor who stole a CEO's heart." Inside, chaos pulsed against the fragile calm. Lily peeked through the curtain, whispering, "Dad, they're everywhere." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. Exhaustion etched deep into his face. "Pack a small bag," he said gently. "You'll stay with Mrs. Hanley next door until this dies down." "But Dad, no arguments, sweetheart."
It's just noise.
"We'll ride it out." Lily nodded reluctantly, slipping her sketchbook into her backpack. Before leaving, she hugged him tightly. "She didn't mean to hurt us," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "I know." When the door closed behind her, the silence that followed felt louder than the shouting outside. Then came a new sound, the low hum of an engine stopping at the alley's end. A black sedan door opened. Isabella stepped out, dressed simply for once, rain dampening her hair. Reporters swarmed instantly, shouting questions, but her security held them back as she crossed the puddled ground toward him. Ethan stood in the doorway, jaw tight. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, voice almost drowned by camera clicks. "But I had to be," he gestured toward the crowd.
"You see what's happened?"
"My daughter can't even walk to school now." Her expression softened with guilt.
"Ethan, I never wanted this. When they mocked you, I couldn't stay silent." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You didn't do anything wrong."
"The world just has a way of turning kindness into headlines." Rain trickled between them, soft as regret. She took a step closer.
"Come with me," she said.
"At least until this settles. You and Lily can stay at my property outside the city. No cameras."
"No noise. I'm not a story you can manage," he said, half smiling, half broken. "I'm not trying to manage you," she whispered.
I'm trying to make things right." For a moment, neither spoke. Then he nodded slowly, defeated by her sincerity rather than persuasion. "All right," he said.
"Just until it's quiet again," she exhaled, relief flickering in her eyes.
Together they slipped into the car as flashes burst like lightning behind tinted glass. Inside, the noise faded, replaced by the steady hum of rain on the roof. Neither spoke for a long while. The city blurred past, grey, wet, distant. Finally, Isabella turned slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You reminded me I was human." Ethan looked at her, eyes tired but kind. "And you reminded me I still matter." No one filmed that line. No headline caught it. But somewhere between the rain and the silence, something fragile and real began to breathe again. Fame had knocked on his door. Instead, he opened his heart. Spring found the city washed clean again. The air smelled of new beginnings, wet stone, lilac, and hope stitched together after a long winter. Inside the Langford atelier, workers moved like quiet choreography, fabric rippling in their hands as the new line came to life. On the wall, in sleek silver letters, hung the name Ethan had chosen, the Redemption Collection. Every piece told a story. A jacket inspired by a delivery driver's rain-soaked roots. A gown lined with the same rough cotton used by seamstresses who mended clothes at night. Beauty born not from perfection but from endurance. It was Isabella's idea to let him lead, but the soul behind it was his. Now, months after the chaos had faded, Ethan stood at the center of a world that once looked impossible. His hands, once calloused from patching torn hems, now directed a team that stitched compassion into every seam. Across the room, Isabella watched him quietly, pride softening the edges of her usual composure. At the rehearsal for the line's grand debut, the air buzzed with nervous energy. Models waited, lights flickered, and cameras tested angles. Isabella slipped behind a curtain to try on the final piece, a flowing gown of pale ivory silk, symbolic of renewal. But the zipper at the back snagged midway, refusing to budge. She laughed under her breath, irony not lost on her. "Some things never change," she murmured. Before she could call for help, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "May I?" Ethan stepped forward, his reflection appearing beside hers in the mirror. Time folded back in a single breath. He reached for the zipper gently, the same way he had that first night, fingers steady, movement deliberate. The silk glided upward beneath his touch, and the faint sound of the closing seam felt like a heartbeat sinking back into rhythm. Their eyes met in the mirror. No words, no distance, just a quiet understanding. What had begun in exhaustion and formality had turned into something unspoken, deeper than gratitude or friendship. "You know," she said softly, "I still have that jacket." He smiled.
"I figured you would. It's in a frame in my office now," she added.
"The first stitch in this whole story." He looked at her, voice low. "And you made sure the rest didn't unravel?" She turned, the gown catching the light like water. For a moment it felt as if the world outside the room didn't exist. The applause waiting, the cameras, the headlines. Only two people, once strangers divided by status, now bound by something neither could name. He adjusted the final seam, fingers brushing hers as he stepped back. "Perfect," he said quietly. She smiled.
"It started with a zipper," she whispered, eyes glistening. He nodded, finishing her thought with the warmth of certainty.
And it ended with a promise. The lights dimmed to rehearsal cues, but for them, the moment didn't need stage or audience. It was already complete. A year later, the Langford Foundation Gala returned to the same ballroom where their story had first begun. This time, the chandeliers shone warmer, softer, as if the light itself remembered. The air hummed with music and laughter, but beneath the surface there was something different, something real. The stage, lined with white orchids and golden fabric, bore the emblem of the Redemption Collection, now known across the country for its humanity as much as its elegance. Isabella stood near the front, radiant in a gown of midnight blue silk, her hair swept to one side, a single pearl clasped at her neck. The zipper down her back glinted faintly under the lights, seamless, strong, perfect. Beside her, Ethan adjusted his tie awkwardly, still unused to spotlights and tuxedos. He glanced at her, smiling.
"I still don't belong in rooms like this," he whispered. She turned, eyes warm.
"You built this room, Ethan. You just didn't know it." Before he could reply, the MC's voice filled the hall. "Tonight, we honor our first full scholarship recipient from the Redemption Initiative, a program inspired by one man's act of quiet kindness." Applause rose, echoing like waves. On stage, Lily stepped into the light, her nerves disguised by a proud, steady smile. She wore a simple dress she had sewn herself, stitches straight, lines clean. In her hands, the scholarship certificate trembled slightly. "I'd like to thank my father," she said, voice clear and small. "He taught me that even when life comes apart at the seams, you can always stitch it back together." Ethan's throat tightened. The room blurred at the edges as applause swelled again. Isabella touched his hand lightly, grounding him in the moment. Their fingers stayed together, not clasped, just resting, a quiet connection that said more than words. When the cameras turned toward them, she didn't pull away. She looked at him with a calm that no headline could twist. He looked back, humbled, full. There was no grand declaration, no cinematic kiss, just peace, earned, fragile, and whole. As the lights dimmed for the next segment, Isabella leaned closer.
"You realize," she murmured, "the zipper held this time." Ethan chuckled softly, eyes on his daughter.
"Guess we both learned how to sew, right?" The camera panned briefly across the crowd, catching Isabella's gown, the zipper gleaming in perfect symmetry under the stage light. It lingered there, as though even the lens understood what it meant. A line once torn, now flawless.
A wound once hidden, now healed. The narrator's voice carried through the music.
Gentle and steady. Sometimes love isn't sewn from luxury, but from the quiet hands that help you stand tall again. Applause rose once more, filling the hall with warmth. Ethan exhaled, the sound almost a laugh. Isabella turned toward him, eyes glistening but calm.
No fairy tale ending, no need for one, just two lives mended where they had torn. The zipper that once closed a dress now opened two hearts.